You think some garden party makes you untouchable? Veronica screamed as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. I built this community, but the crowd had already turned, and the woman who ruled Willow Crest with fear now stood exposed, unraveling on the very lawn she tried to seize. The first sign that something was wrong came the moment we pulled into our driveway, still humming along to the last verse of the love song that had played on the radio since we left the coast. Melanie leaned over to kiss my cheek, both of us, still basking in the warm glow of our anniversary weekend in Mendocino, 3 blissful days away from phones, meetings, and HOA emails. It should have been a soft landing back into reality. Instead, it felt like a brick through the window. Jordan Melanie whispered, her smile fading as she peered out the passenger side window. What? What is that? I followed her gaze toward the back edge of our property and saw a solid 6-foot concrete wall, freshly poured, harsh and gray against the spring green of our yard. It stretched like a scar, slicing cleanly across what we knew to be our land. I parked the car, my heart thudding like a drum in my chest. We rushed through the house and out to the backyard, disbelief giving way to a slow, dawning rage. Where once our property flowed gently into the open half-acre that came with the deed, there was now a cold barrier, a wall that no one had asked for, no one had warned us about, and no one had the right to build. Attached to it, laminated and bolted into the concrete, was a small official-looking notice. Willow Crest Meadows HOA, Community Conservation Buffer Zone, no trespassing. A stamp at the bottom claimed the action was taken under emergency land preservation measures. I stood there in stunned silence, staring at the notice, feeling a mix of fury and confusion clawing its way up my throat. Melanie was already pulling out her phone, snapping pictures. "This has to be a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "This land is ours, Jordan. It's in the deed. We're not crazy, right?" "No," I replied tightly. "We're not." Back inside, we spread the paperwork out across our kitchen island, our purchase agreement, the official survey, the deed from the county recorder's office. All of them said the same thing: the land now hidden behind that wall belonged to us, 70 feet beyond the house. No easements, no zoning restrictions. Nothing in the HOA welcome packet, those glossy brochures we'd received after closing 8 months ago, mentioned anything about a conservation buffer zone. And yet there it was. Concrete, steel, bureaucratic fiction turned physical obstruction. First thing Monday morning, I called the HOA office. A clipped, unfriendly voice greeted me. "This is Rachel Drummond, HOA administration." I identified myself, explained the situation, and requested an immediate explanation. Rachel, to her credit, didn't hang up, but she might as well have. Any and all disputes regarding boundary adjustments must be presented during the scheduled community review session, which occurs on the second Thursday of the month. Please review the updated conservation policies filed with the April newsletter. "We didn't receive an April newsletter," I said firmly. "We were told we own that land. Our deed says we own that land." "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellis. You'll need to bring any materials to the meeting." Then she hung up. Not a single word of concern. No willingness to investigate. Just a cold wall of red tape, just like the concrete slab outside. Melanie and I spent the next few hours emailing the HOA, attaching all relevant documents, citing county parcel maps, and demanding a formal response. The only reply, an automated message thanking us for contributing to community engagement. That night we sat on our patio, wine glasses untouched, our backyard view destroyed by the wall's looming shadow. "This isn't just wrong," Melanie said, staring into the distance. "This is a message. They want us to know they can do whatever they want." She was right, and the more we talked, the more the pieces started to come together. We remembered offhand comments from the realtor about Willow Crest's proactive HOA and strong community oversight. Harmless-sounding phrases at the time, warnings in retrospect. The next day I visited our next-door neighbor, Tasha Lim, a kind, sharp-witted woman who ran a local flower shop downtown. She didn't look surprised when I brought up the wall. "It's happening again," she sighed, leading me to her porch. "Last summer, they declared the Northwest Trailhead an ecological corridor and blocked off access to 5 homes' back gates. Called it a butterfly protection zone. But really, Veronica just wanted to reroute foot traffic away from her house. And the board approved it without a single vote." "Veronica?" I asked. "Veronica Mallory, HOA president. You've probably never seen her. She doesn't show up to anything that isn't pre-scripted. But she pulls every string in this place. And her enforcer, that's Marshall Tennyson. Tall guy, white hair, always carrying a clipboard like it's a badge. I thanked Tasha and walked home more unsettled than ever. The problem wasn't just the wall, it was the system behind it. A machine built to operate in the shadows. A few days later, while Melanie was grading papers and I was flipping through our HOA packet for the 10th time, I heard a knock on the door. Standing on our porch was a man who looked like a retired drill sergeant. "Mr. Ellis," he asked. "Marshall Tennyson, Willowcrest, HOA compliance." He didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped forward, pointing toward the wall. "You've got questions about the new conservation barrier. I'm here to advise you that per Resolution 7.3b, all buffer zones take precedence over private land claims. This is part of our community's long-term environmental stewardship plan. That's not in our deed," I said, showing him the documents. Marshall didn't even glance down. HOA regulations supersede deed claims when tied to active preservation policy. "I'd like to speak directly with Veronica Mallory," I said. "She's not available for private complaints," he replied, almost bored. "You can present a concern at the next board review, but if you attempt to breach the barrier, there will be a $500 fine per day, and you'll be placed on our internal watch list." He smiled then, like it was a joke, but his eyes weren't smiling, just a friendly heads up. As he walked away, clipboard tucked under his arm like a weapon, I felt my grip tighten around the papers in my hand. I turned to Melanie, who had come to the door midway through. "He doesn't care what's legal," I said. "They think no one will stop them." That evening we went to see Gerald Chan, a retired civil rights attorney who had lived in Willowcrest for over 30 years. I'd met him once during a block cleanup day and remembered his quiet dignity. Gerald invited us in, poured us tea, and listened without interrupting. When we finished, he nodded slowly. "It's starting again," he murmured. "It started with the signage policy in 2019, then the tree pruning codes. Now it's land." "How is that possible?" Melanie asked. "They're a homeowners association, not a government." "Ah," Gerald said with a wry smile. "But they write their own rules and no one questions them. That's how power works. But there is one thing they didn't count on." He got up and returned with a battered green binder labeled Willowcrest Founding Charter, 1987. "This," he said, flipping through it. "Clause 19F, a protection clause, buried in the development covenant. It says that if the HOA infringes on private land without due process and community-wide approval, homeowners can activate an emergency suspension of board authority." "Why hasn't anyone used it?" I asked. "Because it requires overwhelming documentation and the courage to be the first one to fight back." Gerald leaned forward, eyes sharp. "If you want to stop them, Mr. Ellis, you're going to need both." That night, Melanie and I sat side by side staring at the wall outside our window. It was just concrete, but it represented something far bigger, a boundary not just of land, but of control. And something in both of us knew we weren't going to let it stand. Not now, not ever. We didn't sleep that night. Not really. We laid in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all, the wall, the threats, the casual way Marshall had dismissed our deed like it was a piece of junk mail. And even though we hadn't spoken it aloud, we both knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about a backyard anymore. It was about control, about intimidation, about being told that no matter what the law said, we didn't matter. By morning, the air in our home was tight with tension. I could see it in the way Melanie clutched her coffee mug, eyes distant. She was already thinking ahead, strategizing. It's what she did best. "We can't let this slide," she finally said. "They're hoping we'll roll over, that we'll give up. But if this happened to us, it's happened to others." She was right, of course. And just like that, we went from being a quiet couple who tended a garden and paid our dues to people at the center of something much bigger. The retaliation started the next day. A thick envelope arrived on our porch, hand-delivered by a teenager wearing a Willowcrest Meadows community polo. Inside were 3 violation notices. One for excessive shrub overgrowth, our rosemary bush. One for non-compliant mailbox color, which had been painted the exact same beige since before we bought the house. And one for unauthorized yard ornamentation, a ceramic owl no taller than a shoebox which we'd placed in our garden bed. Each violation carried a fine. Each fine was dated retroactively. The total $1,275, due in 10 business days. Melanie laughed when she saw it, a low, humorless laugh that chilled me. They're not even trying to make it look real anymore, she said. That afternoon, I noticed the water pressure in the house dropped to a trickle. I called the city utility department, and after a brief hold, the representative came back sounding confused. Sir, the shutoff was requested by the HOA, said it was part of an urgent environmental remediation order. Is there a dispute? My jaw clenched so tight I could feel it throb. Yes, I said. There's a dispute. We filled pots with bottled water and kept the faucets off. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. We were being squeezed, and the rest of the neighborhood silent, or watching. I couldn't tell. That evening, we found a bright orange flyer taped to our front door. An emergency HOA disciplinary hearing had been scheduled. Location, the community center. Topic, repeated covenant violations by residents Jordan and Melanie Ellis. The date was 2 days away. We were being dragged into a show trial. I stood there staring at the flyer while Melanie made a quiet call to Gerald Chan. We need advice, she said, and fast. The meeting was brutal. The room was full, more people than I'd ever seen at a neighborhood function. The stage was set like a tribunal. Marshall sat at the center with his arms crossed. Rachel Drummond flanked him with a laptop. And at the far end sat Veronica Mallory, regal, detached. She hadn't been at our doorstep, but now she made her presence felt. As we took our seats, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Melanie reached for my hand. Stay calm, she whispered. Let them show their hand first. The accusations were outrageous. Deliberate environmental violations, unauthorized landscaping, water misuse during drought restrictions. Marshall read them off one by one, his tone dripping with indignation. Then came the penalty, a $10,000 fine, payable within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in the HOA taking temporary custodial control of the front yard, pending resolution. Melanie stood slowly, calm and precise. Can you show us where these rules exist? Where they were voted on? Where residents were informed? Silence. Veronica shifted in her chair but said nothing. Marshall simply tapped the desk. Internal board procedures, not subject to community vote. That was the moment everything clicked for us. This wasn't about order. It was about leverage. They didn't need us to agree. They just needed us to submit, and we weren't going to. That night we called Tasha Lim. We want to organize something, Melanie said. Something neighborly, legal, but honest. Spring Garden Social. Tasha replied without missing a beat. On my lawn, no permits required. The plan was born. A potluck, lawn games, kids' crafts, nothing political on the surface. But beneath the lemonade table and folding chairs, we would build something else, a movement. Gerald brought old HOA charters and a folding table labeled, Know Your Rights. We printed flyers about Clause 19F, softly worded but clear. And people came. Not everyone, but enough. Neighbors who'd once been silent started telling stories. About fences moved, trees cut down, unexplained dues. I thought it was just me, one woman whispered. An hour and a woman in her 50s with neat curls and a pinched expression approached Melanie. Claudine Barker, she introduced herself quietly. I'm the HOA's treasurer. I've noticed things, transfers, payments to consulting firms that don't seem real. Veronica doesn't let us ask questions, but I've kept records, all of them. Melanie's breath caught. Would you be willing to share them? Not yet, but soon. The next morning, Claudine didn't show up for her weekly board check-in. The day after that, I spotted her car parked awkwardly on the edge of the park, keys still in the ignition. Inside was a laptop, still on. I opened it, heart pounding, and saw spreadsheet after spreadsheet. Transactions, shell companies, Community Solutions Consulting, $18,000 a month. Paid from HOA reserves, the same account where our fines would have landed. And buried deep in one folder, a land survey. Red outlines tracing a series of backyards, including ours. At the top, Summit Oak Partners, Acquisition Plan D. Claudine had uncovered everything. They weren't just harassing us. They were stealing land, flipping it to a developer. And our home was the keystone. I brought the laptop to Gerald. We backed everything up, locked the files in a fireproof safe, and then we waited. But Veronica didn't. That afternoon, a new notice was delivered. Our water would remain shut off pending compliance. A second flyer announced an emergency HOA security assessment which required an immediate $350 fee from all residents. Word spread. People started talking. Tasha's phone rang nonstop. Gerald's table was moved to the front of his lawn. And then, just as we began to feel the tide might turn, Melanie's phone rang. It was her school principal. A complaint had been filed, anonymous. Questionable curriculum choices, they claimed. The implication was clear: they were reaching beyond our home, into our work, our stability, our peace. Melanie hung up and looked at me with fire in her eyes. They want a war, she said. Let's give them one. With truth. We had the files. We had the names. We had the claws. All we needed now was a platform, and the courage to speak when they expected us to shrink. The wall in our backyard hadn't just divided our land. It had woken something up, something rooted, unshakable. And as we stood together, surrounded by neighbors who were beginning to question the HOA's stranglehold, I realized the real power wasn't behind the board's doors or stamped in red ink on official notices. It was in the community itself, and now it was rising. The night after we found Claudine's laptop, Melanie and I sat at the kitchen table in silence, the screen still glowing between us like a bomb waiting to detonate. The files were all there: transaction logs, forged invoices, land parcel maps with our backyard circled in red ink, and a string of payments made to something called Summit Oak Partners. At the top of one document was a note: final acquisition, needed by Q2 Close, Ellis Property, high priority. It was in Veronica Mallory's handwriting. No question. We didn't sleep. We barely spoke. There was too much at stake to waste time processing fear. We made calls. First to Gerald, who insisted on driving over with 2 portable safes. Then to Carla Jensen, a real estate attorney and one of Melanie's oldest friends from her college activism days. Carla called back within an hour. This isn't a zoning dispute, she said flatly. This is fraud, embezzlement, possibly conspiracy to commit theft. If you're ready, we're going to need to go public and fast. And we were ready. We'd spent weeks being pushed, fined, watched, harassed. Now it was our turn to speak. With Carla's help, we drafted a full legal summary citing both HOA charter law and state property statutes. We outlined the misuse of funds, the unauthorized land seizure strategy, and the hidden development deal. We cited Clause 19F by name and began collecting resident signatures to formally trigger the clause. All we needed now was a venue and an audience. That weekend, we reserved Willowcrest's Public Park Pavilion. It was technically outside the HOA's direct control, just beyond the line of their jurisdiction. We called it a community information night and hand-delivered neutral-looking invitations to over 100 homes. Melanie and I didn't sleep that Friday, our nerves coiled like springs. But when the sun rose Saturday morning, we knew this was the day it all shifted. The turnout exceeded anything we'd imagined. Over 120 people showed up, many with folding chairs, some with clipboards, most with quiet, cautious curiosity on their faces. Gerald stood to the side chatting with residents. Tasha poured lemonade, and then just before the event started, a car pulled into the lot. Claudine Barker stepped out, flanked by 2 police officers and wearing dark sunglasses. Her face was pale but composed. She walked straight to Melanie, hugged her without a word, and handed her a flash drive. This is everything, she said. Veronica's been funneling HOA funds for years through a fake consulting firm registered to Marshall Tennyson's nephew. Melanie nodded. Thank you for coming forward. You've just changed everything. Then, to everyone's surprise, a second car rolled in. Out stepped City Commissioner Edgar Bloom, and behind him Assistant District Attorney Naomi Drummond, Rachel's daughter. The tension in the pavilion turned electric. We're here in an observational capacity, Bloom announced. We've received preliminary documentation suggesting serious misconduct within the Willowcrest Meadows HOA. Our office is reviewing it now. I took the microphone, cleared my throat, and looked out at the faces watching me. My name is Jordan Ellis. This is my wife, Melanie. You may have heard bits and pieces of what's happened to us, but we're not here just to talk about a wall or a few fines. We're here to talk about truth. Over the next 40 minutes, we laid everything out systematically, clearly, with no theatrics. We projected spreadsheets. We showed scanned copies of forged signatures. Claudine provided an audio recording of Veronica referencing the land sale in a closed board meeting. Gerald read aloud from the original HOA charter, emphasizing Clause 19F. And Carla explained how our signed petition, now with over 70% of households on board, activated the emergency provision to suspend HOA authority pending legal review. Then Melanie spoke. We were just trying to protect our backyard, but it turns out we were protecting all of yours too. And now it's time to take our community back. The pavilion erupted in applause louder than I expected, louder than I think anyone expected. But the moment didn't last, because just as the crowd began to disperse, Veronica Mallory arrived. She stepped out of a black Lexus, dressed like she'd walked off a country club billboard with Marshall Tennyson 2 steps behind, and a man in a suit carrying a stack of folders. This gathering is illegal, Veronica announced, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. The HOA board did not authorize this assembly, and as of this morning, 10 homes are in foreclosure proceedings due to unpaid assessments and covenant violations, including the Ellises. She handed the folders to Marshall, who began distributing foreclosure notices like party favors. One was placed directly into my hand. $27, $800 in unpaid fines, it read. Seizure to occur in 72 hours. My jaw tightened. This notice isn't legal, I said. You have no standing. The board has been suspended under Clause 19F. Clause 19F is obsolete, Veronica snapped. Revised bylaws superseded. Carla stepped forward, then calm and composed. State law says otherwise. And we filed copies of the activation with the county, the DA's office, and your own bank's legal counsel. Naomi Drummond raised a hand. And for the record, the district attorney's office is launching a formal investigation into your use of HOA funds. Any further actions taken today could be considered obstruction. Veronica's smile never wavered, but something in her eyes cracked. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she hissed at me. I built this community. Without me, these homes would be worthless. Without you, I replied, holding up the forged invoice. They might actually feel like home. Marshall moved to tape the notice on our car windshield, but Gerald stepped in. That would be trespassing under a suspended governance structure, he said. Try it, and I'll file the restraining order myself. Cameras were rolling, phones were out. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down were now stepping forward, and Veronica She unraveled right there in front of us. You think this is over, she screamed. You think some potlucks and garden parties make you heroes. I kept this place in line while you all took your vacations and planted your little flowers. You'll regret this, Claudine held up a flash drive. Veronica, we have 5 years of transactions. This isn't about flowers. This is about fraud. And then Veronica did something no one expected. She lunged at Claudine, knocking the flash drive to the ground and shrieking, You traitor! Officers stepped in, immediately pulling her back as the crowd gasped. Marshall tried to retreat but was surrounded by residents shouting questions. Naomi stepped to the mic. As of now, the Willowcrest HOA is under formal audit. The board's authority is suspended. Any foreclosure notices are null and void. Charges are pending. Veronica was led away in handcuffs. Rachel Drummond, standing off to the side, looked down and said nothing. We found out later she resigned quietly that night. Within days, county officials removed the concrete wall behind our house. Our water was restored. The false violations disappeared from our record. And the fraudulent foreclosure filings were voided. The HOA's funds were frozen. A temporary board was appointed, Gerald as interim chair, Claudine as treasurer. A full audit was ordered. And something even rarer happened. People began talking to each other. Doors opened. Conversations happened. Willowcrest began to breathe again. It was as if the community had been suffocating under invisible weight, and someone had finally opened the window. 1 month later, we planted the first rows of vegetables in our backyard: tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots. Melanie stood with her hands in the dirt, smiling like I hadn't seen her smile in months. And on the fence that once held a trespassing notice, Gerald hung a small bronze plaque. It read, in recognition of Clause 19, because rights like roots grow stronger when defended. Standing there with the soil beneath my boots and the sound of children laughing down the street, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about the land behind our house. It was about standing firm when the powerful tried to bend the rules. About planting something true in a place overrun with control. It was about a neighborhood that finally remembered what it meant to be one. In every neighborhood, behind every picket fence, there are stories we don't always see, stories of struggle, of injustice, and of everyday people standing up for what's right. Jordan and Melanie Ellis didn't set out to become community leaders. They just wanted to protect their backyard. But when they were pushed, when their rights were stripped away, their water shut off, and their home threatened, they chose to fight back with truth, courage, and a deep belief in community. The lesson here is clear silence allows injustice to grow. But when even one person dares to speak up, others find the courage to follow. Jordan and Melanie didn't have political power or deep pockets. What they had was documentation determination and the willingness to organize. They leaned on their neighbors, they reached out to legal experts, and they used their voices calmly and firmly to expose the corruption that had taken root under the guise of authority. To our viewers, especially those facing unfairness in their own communities, whether from HOAs, local councils, or other power structures, know this: you are not alone. Read your bylaws. Know your rights. Build alliances with neighbors. Document everything. And when the time comes to stand your ground, stand with clarity, not with fear. Because sometimes, as we saw in Willowcrest Meadows, the very system that tries to control you is more fragile than it appears. When exposed to truth, it crumbles. From our channel, US Daily Story, we want to extend a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you who tuned in, commented, shared, and supported these justice-driven stories. We believe in the power of storytelling to open eyes, start conversations, and create change. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own experience, we encourage you to drop a comment below. Share your voice. Your story might be the spark someone else needs to stand up for theirs. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and remember, real community isn't built through control. It's built through care, respect, and courage.